Madam President, for the second time in a week, I come to the floor to implore my Democratic colleagues to stop partisan obstruction of public safety officials. We have 10 highly qualified nominees on the Senate floor right now, waiting for confirmation. Several have blue slips from Democratic senators. All were reported to the floor by voice vote. There's no reason that we shouldn't get them to work for the American people today. As I explained just a few days ago, communities around our country are in desperate need of U.S. attorneys to protect the public and uphold the rule of law. 81% of the Americans think that crime is a large city in large cities is a major problem. If we can agree to put partisanship aside, this body can take a tangible step to address this today by confirming 10 qualified law enforcement officers to their posts. I'm disappointed that my Democratic colleagues have chosen to place partisan obstruction over public safety. I'm here again today to give my colleagues a chance to do the right thing. This blanket obstruction of all nominees is a misguided attempt to score political points. I know that several of my Democrat colleagues agree with me because just a few months ago, some of them stood on the Senate floor and made the same argument that I'm making today. One speech last Congress, the Democratic whip and chairman of the Judiciary Committee said, quote, "Don't stand up and say that you're for law and order, you're for law enforcement, and then turn around and stop the appointment of U.S. attorneys," end of quote. In another speech, the same senator said, quote, "Our communities desperately need top federal prosecutors in place, interested in stopping fentanyl, question mark. I am. Thousands of people are dying. Who's going to prosecute these cases? The U.S. attorneys, 93 of them across the United States. But you can't prosecute cases if you don't have U.S. attorneys there to lead the effort, coordinate the effort with other branches of government." My Democratic colleagues continue to claim that their obstruction is justified because 2 Republican senators placed holds on some U.S. attorneys in the last administration. This compares apples with oranges. One of the senators relented on his hold and allowed U.S. attorneys to be confirmed by voice vote. The other senator ultimately blocked 5 U.S. attorneys. A handful of U.S. attorneys being held last Congress, which I opposed, isn't comparable to the blanket hold on all 93 U.S. attorneys that we're facing today. The strategy this Congress is orchestrated by Senate Democratic leadership and is part of a broader Senate-wide assault on the functioning of the executive branch. At the end of the day, we can just look at the numbers. During the Biden administration, nearly 94% of his U.S. attorneys nominees were confirmed by voice vote. So far in the second Trump administration, 0% of his U.S. attorneys nominees have been confirmed by voice vote. For months, I've repeatedly tried to engage my Democratic colleagues to end their obstruction. I've warned that their tactics ultimately hurt the American people and will lead to lasting damage to the Senate as an institution. I've even offered a compromise where we hold 5 roll call votes to compensate the 5 nominees returned to the president at the end of March. To my great disappointment, my colleagues haven't relented from that strategy, and I hope they'll relent today with my unanimous consent request. I mentioned last week that one of the U.S. attorneys being held up is Daniel Rosen, nominated for the District of Minnesota. Mr. Rosen was reported out of committee by voice vote. He's supported by his home state Senators Klobuchar and Smith, both Democrats. He's qualified nominee. He should be responding to the horrific mass shooting of children at the Annunciation Catholic Church, but instead is languishing here on the Senate floor as a pawn for partisan obstruction. This needs to end, and it needs to end today. So I now will ask unanimous consent to confirm 10 U.S. attorneys who have been reported out of committee. I hope that my Democratic colleagues will allow these nominees to get to work. Debate, disagreement about policy is to be expected, but should never be at the expense of public safety. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to consideration of the following nominations en bloc. 176, David Waterman, Iowa. 183, Ron Parsons, South Dakota. 257, David Metcalf, Pennsylvania. 258, Bart Davis, Idaho. 316, Kurt Alme, Montana. 317, Nicholas Chase, North Dakota. 318, Leslie Murphy, Nebraska. 319, David Rosen, Minnesota. 320, Eric Seibert, Virginia. Kurt Wall, 321, Kurt Wall, Louisiana. That the Senate vote on the nomination en bloc without intervening action or debate. The motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, that the President be immediately notified of the objection.
Reserving the right to object.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. First, let the public know what they're talking about obstruction. 2 hours of debate and a vote on some of the worst nominees we have ever seen. They want to pile them all together. Some of these nominees are the people who know them in their states are appalled that they would be nominated. Trump has chosen his U.S. attorneys for one reason only: blind obeisance to him. That's it. No rule of law, no independence. So, of course, our friends are afraid of 2 hours of debate and a vote, because so many of these nominees are so bad. Historical bad nominees deserve a historical response. So we wanted to come to an agreement with our colleagues to let some of the better ones through, but we couldn't. Not because of our Senate colleagues. Senator Grassley was involved, Senator Thune was involved. We were close to an agreement. And what happened? Donald Trump, who wants these horrible nominees, so many of them, said, "Go to hell." That's what he said. So instead of our Republican colleagues telling Donald Trump, "No, we can work out an agreement that's fair," they said, "Okay." They pulled back. And now what's their alternative? They're ready to detonate Senate precedent altogether and go nuclear on all the nominees. So much for oversight. And before they even do that, now they want to rubber stamp another round of nominees. No scrutiny, no debate. 2 hours of debate and a vote for someone as powerful as a U.S. attorney. Most Americans would agree that's the least we could do. The least we could do. So, no scrutiny, no debate, no consent from us. I want to be very clear. If my colleague from Iowa, who's a good man, wants to resume our negotiations, which we were ready to do, and he knows it, he was part of it, if he's willing to back off threats to go nuclear, we'll be open to having a conversation about a nominees package, including the ones on his list. We'll be open to negotiation just as we were at the end of July, when we were in that room right across the hall from here and ready to have an agreement, when all of a sudden Donald Trump says go to hell and the Republican leadership says, okay, we won't do it because he doesn't like it, even though he has historically bad, reprehensible nominees. So, if Republicans are dead set on going nuclear, we will not grant consent today. I object.
Madam President.
Senator from Iowa.
Well, obviously, I'm disappointed that my request has been objected to. I hope today that we could set a new direction, put interest of the American people over partisanship. I want to offer to Senator Democratic leader an offer he shouldn't object to because it has both Republican and Democrat supports. If we can't agree to allow 10 U.S. attorneys who've been reported out of committee to be confirmed today, I'm going to make a more modest request. David Waterman is my pick to be U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa, highly qualified. He was reported out of committee by voice vote. No recorded objections. My state needs him to get to work. I initially recommended him to President Biden during the last administration, and he was nominated and reported out of committee last Congress. My Democratic colleagues have tried to justify their obstruction by pointing to the hold by then Senator Vance last Congress. Well, Mr. Waterman was one of the 5 U.S. attorneys returned to the president from that hold. So are we going to confirm a nominee who's been submitted to the Senate by 2 different presidents and reported out of committee twice? Seems to me like something the Democrats should not object to. Or are my Democratic colleagues going to continue the objection? Now, here's another one. They've got confidence, surely, in their 2 Democratic senators from Minnesota. I've already spoken about Daniel Rosen, but like Mr. Waterman, Mr. Rosen is well qualified to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Minnesota. He, too, was reported out of committee by voice vote, and he's supported by both home state Senators Klobuchar and Smith. Recently, so I encourage my Democratic colleagues to send a clear signal to the people of Minnesota that they think that they ought to have a law enforcement person at their side. The District of Minnesota needs its top federal prosecutor in place to preserve law and order, so we need to confirm Mr. Rosen. So I'm now going to ask unanimous consent to confirm Mr. Waterman and as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa, and Mr. Rosen to be U.S. Attorney for the District of Minnesota. So I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the consideration of the following nominations in block. 176, David Waterman, Iowa. 319, David Rosen, Minnesota. That the Senate vote on the nominations en bloc without intervening action or debate. The motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, that the President be immediately notified.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. I would, with respect, remind my colleague that all 3 of these people were on our list that we were negotiating and could have been passed with our agreement. Donald Trump said, quote, "Go to hell." You, Republican leader, backed off. So you could have had it done with an agreement, a bipartisan agreement, not a partisan agreement where the Republicans have just choose whoever they want, no matter. So the bottom line, once again, is simple. You want to get these things done? Negotiate an agreement in a bipartisan way. Don't bow down to Donald Trump, who, as I said, has nominated for U.S. Attorney and many other places some of the worst nominees, the most conflicted nominees, the least qualified nominees we have ever seen. I object.
Objection is heard.
You can see the weakness of that objection, because here's somebody that's been nominated by President Biden and President Trump, and you have 2 Democratic senators supporting it, at least in those 2 instances out of 93 that are potentially on hold, could go to do their job. I want to make one final request before I yield the floor. The Senate Judiciary Committee, in that committee, it's common practice to report certain nominees by voice vote. We've been doing it for decades, particularly for non-controversial U.S. attorneys and U.S. Marshal nominees. Under my chairmanship, we only conduct voice votes with explicit consent of the ranking member, and we don't do them if there are any objections to so doing. Recently, I've heard concern that nominees reported out of committee by voice vote may be challenged or face additional obstructions on the floor to further derail the functioning of the executive branch. I sincerely hope this isn't the case. Voice votes are a long-standing practice of our committee and involve complete cooperation between the majority and minority party of the committee. On the Senate Judiciary Committee, despite our differences, the ranking member and I have a good working relationship. When we reach a bipartisan agreement about how to manage our committees consistent with our norms, I hope that every member of this body will respect this agreement. So this is my unanimous request. I ask unanimous consent that no point of order lie with respect to the following U.S. Attorney nominees reported out of the Senate Judiciary Committee by voice vote pursuant to explicit agreement between the offices of chairman and ranking member, whether those nominations are offered individually or pursuant to a resolution. David Waterman, Ronald Parsons, David Metcalf, Bart Davis, Kurt Alme, Nicholas Chase, Leslie Murphy, Daniel Rosen, Eric Siebert, and Kurt Wall.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. Once again, negotiate in a fair, bipartisan way with us, and many of these things could be resolved. Do it in a partisan way, bow down to Donald Trump? No way. I object.
I yield the floor.